You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel,
I'm Daryl Sanders.
and we're your hosts for this show. I always like to sing. So, yeah, I mean, just to get into this thing, now it looks like that there might be this High Republic series coming out. I mean, it's interesting that I don't remember if it was you or me. One of us ran across this article or something.
Mm-hmm.
Which one of us was it?
It might have been you.
Yeah, I think this time it might have been me. But the interesting thing about it is, according to this article, let me see, I got it here actually. It comes off of direct.com. It's one of the sites that, will pop up in my Google feed a lot of times. And because, what's cool about that, well, it's either cool or creepy. It depends on how you look at things. But whatever that you have a tendency to look up or whatever, like everything else on the internet, it says, oh, you like this? Well, here's 1,000 more of it.
Mm-hmm.
Happens to me all the time. Like if I'm looking up any kind of a product or something, all of a sudden I'm scrolling through some social media site or something and I'm seeing a ton of ads for it. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's kind of cool in a way, but then there's also that sort of creepiness about it too. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the sites that, generally comes up. And they were talking about how there's this whole High Republic series that's prepping filming on Disney Plus as we speak. So, I mean, I find this now, I don't remember actually, let me see. Yeah, it says reports the project began coming out earlier this year. So the way that they describe this thing is a Stranger Things in space, which that was one of the things that really captured my attention because I'm a really big Stranger Things fan, and I really love the vibe of that show and how they capture it. And if they do the High Republic show in that style, I think it'll be very successful. And then it talks about how the recent casting calls for a group of younger roles confirm Lucasfilm would in fact be riffing on the series. So that says to me that this is going to be a live action series. I know that there was talks that, there were, when this thing first came up, I think at some point last year, people were saying, well, this could be an animated series. And I remember you and I, when we were speculating about it, we said, hey, it might actually make a really good animated series because there's a Filoni series that I think is coming up. It's like this, they keep saying it's like an as yet untitled thing or something. And I don't know when the timeline of this thing is coming out, but there's some animated series coming out at some point. And people were speculating that could be the High Republic. So, I mean, with all this stuff coming out, what are your initial thoughts when you hear this?
Well, I think, once again, the High Republic, we've talked about this even once the books and comics started coming out, that, this is a cool thing for Star Wars because this allows people to kind of get away from the Skywalker saga. And, everybody's so wrapped up in that, and we need to start, moving ourselves away from that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good, sandbox to play in because it's before anything that we've ever really truly known about Star Wars for the most part, outside of the Old Republic, which we still don't know a whole lot about either. But we know some things about the Old Republic. But this is supposed to be like the golden age of the Jedi. Of course, the only character we pretty much would know would be Master Yoda. However, this is a interesting, piece to, like I said, or a sandbox to play in because, it does take place before a lot of the rules and things that we've kind of come to know as far as the Jedi in this time period, at least so we think there aren't any Sith around. So now you have to kind of move the Star Wars franchise into a place where there isn't a whole lot of familiarity. And for a lot of fans, that might be scary, but also it's a time to really, truly create and restructure a lot of different things in its own time, and you don't have to affect necessarily the original saga's timeline. By saga, I mean episodes 1, pretty much. I'll even say through 6, even though 7, 8, 9 are canon too. But no, it is what it
Yeah.
is. But I think that it's cool. I think it's interesting. It's a great platform for it to come on. We always say Disney Plus is a prime candidate for these type of series and things like that. You have some source material now with the books and comics, and a lot of people are seem to be pretty happy with that, with the direction as far as the books and the comics are going. So I mean, a lot of people still haven't clued into it that there is a High Republic yet. So now you can introduce people into a whole new thing, especially people like Stranger Things. And I like the comparison that they made to it with being Stranger Things in space. It kind of likens to how I talked about the new Bel Air series, where it's supposed to be the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, but it's more of a dramatization. So I've always told people who've never seen it, take the show All American and Fresh Prince and put it together. There you
Yep.
go.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, "Oh, okay, well that sounds cool because I love All American, I love Fresh Prince." Yeah, and 9 times out of 10, you probably love Bel Air. So I think that's a good start, at least to get people's attention, because Stranger Things is such a popular and well done show. I've never watched it, so I definitely want to kind of check it out, just so I can make that, when I do see this High Republic thing surface, I can say, "Oh yeah, it definitely is that." But
Yeah, I
yeah, I
mean,
mean, I
it's
think it's
actually one
cool.
of the best. In fact, I think,
Yeah, it's won tons of awards, and
well,
it's
and I think
critically
it
acclaimed and
actually,
stuff.
yeah, and I think it's what actually kicked off Netflix's original series. I mean, it's not like they haven't done anything before, but that was by far the most successful one.
Hmm.
And that really was the one that gave Netflix more the license to, start going after other series. And I mean, so far there's only 3 seasons. I mean, it's funny because they released the first couple of seasons more or less back to back, and then they released season 3, and it's been like 2 or 3 years now. And we're supposed to get season 4, I think. It's either sometime like in the summer or maybe, yeah, I don't think it's 2023. I think we are getting it this year, but it's a really, really well done series, and it kind of has like a Stand By Me vibe to it, but it takes you on this really wild ride because, you're introduced to all these characters at first in the first season, and you basically grow with them. And it's basically where a lot of these kids got, their big break, really.
Hmm.
And it's definitely the breakout role for a lot of them. And I could see a High Republic series doing very much the same thing. Because like when we take a look at this, now what's funny is I of course still read, I think there's 2 different comic series and then there's 2 different book series. There's on the book side, there's like a young adult series, and then there's kind of the what I would call the High Republic proper, right? Where it's
Hmm.
and even then, it's like I found out. So I read like Into the Light, and then I read or I'm sorry, Light of the Jedi, and then Into the Darkness or something like that. But that was actually sort of like separate because um man, what's the one I'm reading now? It's been a minute since I picked it up, but it's the one that I'm reading now is technically book 2. So I kind of read things a little bit, you know, out of order in a sense.
Hmm.
But even then, one of the things that you learn very quickly about the High Republic is there's like a gang of these people, right? Like, I mean, I don't recall the
Hmm.
name of the characters that, we see actually over here. I mean, I'm used to all the big guys like Skier of our Chris,
Great Storm.
Loden Greatstorm, yeah, uh Creve, oh man, see, it's kind of like I even blank on some of these
Oh yeah.
people's names. But I mean, the thing is that there's just so many of them, right? Because there's like that Wookiee one, and he pops up in one of the books, but it wasn't one of the ones that I had read yet, though. So
Mm.
one of the advantages that you have actually with this series, pretty much going to your point where you said they need to start getting away from the actual Skywalker saga and the characters that are in this, and they need to branch out a little bit. Besides the fact that the Jedi are at their zenith and just where this era sort of fits in the timeline, the other advantage that this show has, quite frankly, is that it's sort of like a microcosm of the Star Wars universe, because you have not just it taking place in a time that's a little bit outside of where we're familiar, but you also have a situation where you have a whole gang of characters that you can pull from. Like I said, when we did this, and I'll probably, it's tough. Maybe I'll just link to the playlist or something. But we did a number of shows when the High Republic was being written and when things were coming up. And one of them was, we started talking about, the Padawans of the High Republic and the Masters of the High Republic. And, it went through, like, the villains of the High, like, we did a show on when they released basically all these different sectors of characters or whatever. And what was interesting about it to me is the fact that there's so many of these guys. A lot of these guys that we covered on those shows, and who at least I am familiar with, I haven't even run into them yet in a comic or in a book.
Right.
It's like there's so many of these guys that when you're actually introduced in the light of the Jedi, it's really crazy to me. So we have a chat here, and it's basically Avos TTV says the Galaxy Adventure version of Yoda will be fun to see. And that's another good point too, because I actually wasn't thinking about that at first. I was getting into all these different characters, but what's really interesting to me about it is that you have all these different characters with all these different, wildly different backstories. But then, yes, you have Yoda. You actually have Yoda, who's like, 150, 200 years younger. And right now, at least at the point that I'm at in the books, he's basically taken a sabbatical, right? He was mainly the guy that was, teaching and instructing. He was, at this point in the Star Wars franchise, he's a little bit less of an adventurer and more of a teacher. But I think that that's going to change. I think that's going to go back. They've been implying that. And of course, you have these great new villains in the Nile and the Drengir. They're just really... Oh, Ronaldo joins us. Hey, Ronaldo.
Hey, man.
So, you just have all these villains who are just really, really cool. And they just have this incredibly, rich storyline. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, just how these guys are going to fit into everything. Because, quite honestly, they could do a lot with this. Now, Avos CTV says he's like the wise old sage now. Excuse me. And so, yeah, he's basically at a point to where he's shifting towards teaching. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see that this is somewhat of a precursor to when he becomes the ultimate Jedi Grandmaster, leader of the Republic, well, at least of the Jedi Order. I shouldn't say the Republic, the Jedi Order. And he starts to shift into what we see as more the modern version of Jedi, right? Because as you pointed out earlier, you have a time where the Jedi aren't so dogmatic about things. That there's a lot of different viewpoints. People are tapping into everything. Like Avar Chris, for instance, here's the song of each person. It's almost like the Force operates musically with her. You have Skier right now, who is basically, he's basically losing his connection to the Force. That's been a big thing, but he flirted a little bit with the dark side. You just have a bunch of different things like that. Now, Ronaldo says, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there rumors about this like 2 or 3 years ago? Yes, there was. And I think we referenced that a little bit before you jumped on. But at that point, we did a show. I don't remember if it was actually on this, but we did a show where we talked about, it possibly being an animated series or anything like that. Ronaldo says, but it was supposed to be a movie. Yeah, there was talk that it could be theatrical. A lot of people thought that maybe when they had all these mystery projects, that maybe that was one of them. This is at the time where, the Old Republic movie was a thing too. There are a lot of different things, but where this is gaining steam is that there's a, trying to remember, there's like a code name that this thing is under, and there's been a lot of movement, and it's not really a strict rumor, right? Like this is actually being confirmed here. So this isn't really it's being kept under wraps, but it's not a rumor or speculation. So this is something that we can actually get excited about. Because I know we just did a show a couple of weeks ago on, there's like a rumor going around that Heir to the Empire is going to be Disney Plus's first film project or something. That's kind of more like in the rumor mill. There is some strong evidence, there's some insider information on that one, but, it's anybody's guess. This, it looks like it could actually happen. And so there's been a lot of reports. There's like a secret code name in which this thing is being filmed under, although if they actually release that, I don't really know if it's really such a secret anymore. So we'll have to see. LSTTV says, I believe so. I wonder if they will touch on Revan at all through Easter eggs or direct mentions. That's a good question, too, because you have to wonder, are they going to try to connect the Old Republic with the High Republic? He goes on to say, I know timeline-wise is many years, but it'd still be interesting if they do. Here's the thing, though. They don't necessarily... Well, I guess they are kind of stuck with the timeline of the Old Republic, right? We know it's something like 10,000 years before Phantom Menace. But here's what's interesting to me. What's interesting to me about this, and then certainly we'll get your thoughts in on this too, is that they could actually reference stuff. They don't necessarily have to stick with what is known to us, at least about the Old Republic, because remember, Revan and everybody was brought in thanks to the Rise of Skywalker. We saw a statue of him. But they don't necessarily have to go by the timeline that was established, because that was still outside of canon. That was still kind of in the expanded universe. Remember, that was during a time when Lucas basically said, look, the only thing that's canon is anything that you've seen in a movie or a TV show, or if I just say it's canon. The Old Republic games that we love so much were technically a little bit outside of that. It was one of those situations where Lucas didn't necessarily deny anything, but he didn't confirm anything either. Ronaldo goes on to say, what about a mix of the two? He says, but that might be controversial. I mean, again, it really depends, because you have to look at it from the standpoint of, you do have a situation where it's not necessarily canon. So they could really do whatever they want. They could redefine the Old Republic. It doesn't necessarily have to take place that far back. Or they can shift how long it was, right? So you have the events that happened maybe 10,000 years or something. But you can, you could play with the timeline a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, with this whole show, first of all, to kind of go back just a little bit, they're already kind of, the code name for this is Grammar Rodeo.
That was it. I remember it had some code name. I just couldn't remember what it was.
Yeah, and they've already started casting. They actually have started making sets for it, and I think they're going to start shooting in June. At least principal photography and things of that nature. So this thing is pretty much coming. I think we're going to find out more about it. What's going to be rolled out to us on May the 4th for Star Wars Celebration. So I think that's where we're going to kind of start getting the update on everything that's going to be forthcoming throughout the remainder of this year and then into the years to come. So we'll find out if the Bad Batch is actually coming back, or if Rogue Squadron is actually going to take place. All of that, I think that's when we're going to kind of get all those answers. But this has been pretty much said that it's a go. It's just that they haven't completely rolled it out yet. So I think they're saving that for Star Wars Celebration. So just to kind of throw that out there. But yeah, I think that with this, you kind of, once again, you always still kind of have to be careful, because you don't want to start screwing with fans already with something brand new. We have brand new books, brand new comics that already have source material. So if you start making a series that doesn't align with a lot of this stuff, now people are going to start questioning, okay, well, what's canon now? What's real? What's not? Because, we all knew that, okay, anything in the films is canon. We know that. But now they said everything that we release from now on is going to be canon, whether it's books, comics, TV series, all of that. But now if the books, comics don't align up with the series, you're going to run yourself into the same problem we've had before.
Yeah, and that's particularly dangerous with the High Republic.
Exactly.
Because it's not quite as established. I mean, the problem is...
that's my big thing.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I think you actually brought this up. It's another thing we did. We actually have a whole playlist on our channel, by the way, of just High Republic stuff, because we reviewed at least, I think, the first 5-6 issues or something like that of the High Republic comic series. And I think it was during that time that you brought up the fact that while it's cool that we have all these characters and that they've established so much in the canon, that there's a danger, though, that by just sort of putting that out there, they have to be careful now when they start to fill that in. Because one of the smart things that they did, obviously, was all the writers actually got together and said, okay, we're going to plan out this whole, this whole timeline, this whole story arc, basically. And then they were going to start breaking that and sectioning that off into the various comic series or book series. And so that's cool. But the question becomes, how much had they really filled all that stuff in? It's like, how much details are there?
Exactly. And that's really my greatest concern. I mean, because although, like I said, this is a great sandbox to play in, I think that when you're bringing something new like this, of course, they're already looking for like younger cast members to play these roles. Of course, we're dealing with a lot of younger Jedi and Padawans and things in this nature. So that makes sense. Cool. Like you said, Stranger Things in space. Great. But now when you're dealing with the story, that's what it has to sell the Star Wars community. It's a story. And if the stories aren't, like you said, completely filled out, and fleshed out, because we only have like 2 books really, right? And some comics.
Oh,
maybe
no.
3 books.
Oh, no. More like 5.
We have 5 now? Okay.
Oh, yeah. They've been pumping this stuff
well, that's
out.
cool.
I mean, in the proper one, I think
heard...
it's like 3 in the proper one. Then you have like a one-off, and then you have the adult novel series. They might even have more than that by now, because they got those. They got 2 different comic series which have several issues at this point.
Yeah. So, and I know that the structure of it is a little different than what most of us are accustomed to, because usually you had like a New Hope, you had books that kind of outlined everything that's going to happen, and then you may have had some comics that might have kind of filled in some in between stuff, and that was about it. But this is kind of like, they had a comic that was kind of a story was taking place on one side, and then you had the book that was strictly dealing with this, and it was kind of, at first it was kind of difficult to kind of bring it all together at first. At least for me it was, I can say. But I think that's just the biggest thing, is making sure the story is intact. As long as the story is intact, and people, and like you said, because you're dealing with a lot of characters too. That's the other thing, is that you have a lot of personalities you kind of have to manage, because you're going to want to know about, okay, the Dringir, the was it the Nile, and then those are like the villains, but then you have like a multitude of these Jedi because they're at the zenith, so there's a whole lot of them, and they're protecting the galaxy. They got a star base that's kind of where a bunch of them are kind of stationed, and then there's another one that kind of spread across the
for a
galaxy.
while.
And
Actually, Starlight
yeah,
Beacon's been destroyed. I mean, there's a lot of things that are where they're doing this smartly, though, is they're approaching this really in a way that is similar to the saga stuff. It's just, it's almost like if you just imagine some of these things existing where it came out all at once. Whereas starting with the whole Lucas thing and everything was linear. You know, you had episode 4, 5, and 6, and then he fills it in 1, 2, and 3, and so on and so forth. And then you start to get the standalone films, and now you're getting some series, and they're all telling stories around the main story arc. You have that with the High Republic. The difference is that we don't have that full story arc. But what's cool is the comic series, at least the main one, because like I said, there's like 2 of them. But what I would call the main one, that one's dealing with a particular story arc. And then you have the books that it's almost like it's dealing with things that are happening in the periphery of where the comics are. And then, of course, you have the other comic series that's focusing on a slightly different set of characters, so on and so forth. So what's happening is you're getting these, and Ronaldo actually pointed this out when we were about to read our very first High Republic comic, and we had yet to read any of the novels. And he brought up that, some of the stuff kind of overlaps that, and that's pretty much where things are falling. I've read like what issue? We're on like issue number 15 or something of the what I would call the High Republic proper comic series. And then I've read like 2.5 of the books. So I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't really feel too intimidated about talking about this, because while I haven't read every single thing yet to deal with the High Republic, I've read enough stuff that I see where it's going now, and I'm getting all the characters straight and everything else. So Avos TTV said it would be from people who are diehard book fans. And yeah, I mean, the thing about that is that being that the High Republic show actually came from the books and the comics, because that's where they chose to tell this story first, which is really an interesting choice. And it's something that we had actually talked about a long time ago, because there's pluses and minuses to that. See, in the books, you can release them with more frequency because you just get a gang of authors that are constantly releasing books every couple of months. Plus, you bulk that up with the comic series that you have, you could get a lot of the story out at one time. Because when you're dealing with a brand new era like this, it's actually not a bad idea to try to get as much source material out as possible. And then you put out maybe a TV series, which is what they're going to do, or a movie, which we had speculated at one time. And you can do that because you basically have all this other stuff supporting it. The trick, though, which is why I think it's really wise that they went with a series instead of a film, is that if you just drop a series, even, say it's 10 episodes, okay? 10 episodes, okay, fine. Here's what happens. You have 10 episodes of this series, and you have to tell the High Republic story in such a way with this thing that fans who know nothing about it, which, as we all know, are the casual Star Wars fans, because, let's face it, they're not all reading the books and the comics. So they may be very unaware. Now, according to a lot of what the people at Disney and, some of the charts and all this stuff have said, I mean, the High Republic stuff is selling. It is doing well. People are aware of it. But it's still what I would consider probably maybe the more devoted casual fan all the way to your super hardcore, just like insane rabid fan, right? But the general public, I would say, are probably still largely unaware of the High Republic. So you have to introduce a series in such a way where people who are brand new to it will understand it and everything else. But you also have to balance that, though, with all the other fans who have invested in the comics and the books and know a lot about this stuff. And they want to see this stuff now in live action and continue the story. Because that's the other thing, too, is that, and this is what I was talking about, painting in a corner. Because let's say they're a third of the way through their big story arc, just with all the material that they have out now. If they're a third of the story, then what would have to happen is one of two things. Either this upcoming series would have to somehow, from the very beginning, have been planned to tell a certain aspect or section of the storyline, or it has to somehow be able to operate outside of whatever their story arc is. Because otherwise, you risk continuity issues, you risk a whole lot of other stuff.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, they even pretty much haven't said it, but they, John Watts, who's the director of Spider-Man: Homecoming, is pretty much the slated director to do this show. By the way,
I like that. That'll be cool.
so yeah. So I mean, they're getting all the. It seems like they're accruing all the right pieces. They're taking their time. You got to kind of wonder how long this has been kind of in development. Because, like I said, if they already done casting, and they may even roll out the cast, for Star Wars Celebration. I mean, it's in May, so that could happen.
Yeah, they still have time.
May bring it. Yeah, they could bring out the director and kind of talk about where they're going with it. I'm assuming they're going to start at the beginning of the High Republic. As far as we know, because like you said, people who are just coming into it who may not know will need to be able to pick up and follow and see what's going on. And you kind of wonder, like, what story are they going to start with first? Are they going to start with like the whole Skier in that situation, or are we going to start with like directly?
Like I said, I don't actually think so. I think what they're going to do is they're either going to do one of two things. They're either going to pick a section of their overall story arc, which they've already started, obviously, with the books and the comics. They're going to pick a section of that and lift it out and maybe use that to tell the story, or they're just going to tell something outside of it. And I mean, they don't necessarily have to start from any kind of a beginning, because they didn't do that with episode 4 when we knew nothing about Star Wars. If you think about it, if you really stop and think about the dialogue in A New Hope, we were all lost. And think about it, I was only 6 years old when I saw it in the theater for the first time, right? They're talking about the Imperial Senate, the Clone Wars, and they're talking about like we should just know what all this is. And it's actually, when you really stop and think about it, it's remarkable, because technically speaking, on paper, the fans should have been completely lost, because we're coming in the middle of this pretty much very well-lived, very
universe.
Yeah, this whole universe, it's been established. That's the word I was looking for. Very firmly established, right? We're not being introduced into it where, from a beginning standpoint, we're not being told of some historical thing leading up to the events. Nope, we are dropped in the middle of this firmly established universe, and yet it's presented in such a way that even though it was obvious from the very beginning, for all of us who saw this in 1977, it was very obvious that there was a lot more to this universe, that there was a lot of depth to it. But at the same time, we were able to follow the story. And I think they're going to do that with this. Now, we got a gang of chats here we should probably get through. Hey, while we're at it, and while we're talking to you guys, don't forget to hit that like button. That like button really helps the channel. And obviously, we love to discuss this stuff with you guys every Monday and every Friday at 8. And so we want to keep bringing you this content. So when you hit that like button, it really helps us out. And then, of course, if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do that too. But Ronaldo basically says, yeah, I don't think the casual audience cares about canon. And he says, most of us do, of course, but we are in the minority. That's an actually interesting little point, too. Do you actually think that the casual fans care about canon?
I think I would say yes and no. I mean, I think they do because we've seen where they get lost and they don't understand, like, okay, well, how was, like, if you really don't, it takes somebody usually to help them or to explain certain things to them. So I think they care about it to the extent of understanding on how to follow the story because they like Star Wars. So they want to kind of, okay, I don't want to be in the theater. Just okay, everybody's cheering and I have no idea why. You know what I mean? Or it's it's kind of like it almost be like kind of the moment where I saw the new Spider-Man, No Way Home, and you know, people didn't know that there were like multiple people like Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield playing Spider. So when they show up, everybody is just like, whoa, and cheering, and they're like, huh? Wait, there's more than one Spider-Man, and okay, where does this come from? Like, okay, well, who are these guys? Because they never saw all the other movies. So I could understand how some people could care about canon to the point as far as like, okay, following the storyline, but then some people just want to see a good movie, and it's like, okay, Star Wars gives them that. It gives them all the things. It gives them the action, the drama, okay, the hero's journey type thing. They're into stuff like that. All right, cool. Bring on the next one. They don't care if it's, solo and when solo takes place, and they don't care about the minutia of that. They just want to see a good
Exactly.
story.
Right. Right. No, I totally agree. And in fact, I mean, just to piggyback on that, really, I think you have to remember that canon just means official, right? I mean, if we're really talking about it, I mean, that's basically what it means. It's kind of like, okay, well, this is official and this is not official. It's glorified fan fiction, which, as much as we all love, well, all of us hardcores anyway, love the old expanded universe, which of course is now called Legends. I mean, let's face it, it was glorified fan fiction. It was professional fan fiction, but fan fiction nonetheless. And so, see, here's the thing. I don't necessarily think the audience differentiates it. See, if you put it in a film, they just assume it's canon.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it's a question of the audience caring about canon or not. I think they don't really even think of that word. That's a word that, only franchise fans care about that, because there are a lot of projects that are more peripheral to any franchise. And so you have to look, well, is this canon? And it means different things to a different franchise. For instance, in the Marvel universe, and DC would count with this too, you have to really differentiate between the canon of the comics versus of the films. And you have that to deal with because you just have 80 years or whatever it is of source material, right? And it's really more like 50 or 70. But in something like the Star Wars franchise, the initial canon or official storylines came from the mind of this one guy. From that standpoint, you can almost compare it to the Harry Potter franchise in that sense. The only difference is that Harry Potter started out as books and then were made into films, whereas Star Wars started out as films and then became, like everything, right? Books, comics, everything.
Well, that's one of the things, and I'm glad you brought that point up because, and I was trying to remember because I wasn't around, of course, so I had to go based off, historical accounts. But
yes, go to the data bank.
Exactly, but because I was trying to figure out, I was like, well, did the movie come before the book, or or the almost like which came first, the chicken or the egg type thing? And So there was a Star Wars New Hope novelization that came out prior to the actual film coming out.
Nope.
So
it was commissioned. So it was based on the screenplay of it, but it was commissioned by Lucas. What happened was the movie came out and it was so wildly popular they turned it into a book.
Well,
and that's why you have now.
Well, help me understand this. Then it says, so it says development of Star Wars Episode 4: New Hope was ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster based on writings from George Lucas. It was first published by Ballantine Books under the title Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, and it was released November 12th, 1976. So that's where I got that from, was because
Because
it was released in 76, but the movie wasn't released in 77.
Yeah, but I mean, what had happened was it was kind of like, so what it was it was a screenplay. That's what I was saying. It was based on his screenplay because he didn't think he was going to get the movie made. He was making it, but remember, there was all kinds of like disastrous things that were happening, right? Because one of the things that a lot of people forget is that you actually had this it's very small, but it's there, like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Shadows of the Empire. There was a couple of books that actually came out like kind of in between episode 4 and episode 5. So a lot of people think that it was Timothy Zahn in 1991 that kicked off the whole thing with Heir to the Empire. But, I mean, he kicked off the expanded universe, no doubt. Right. But there was like a mild expanded universe. And by the way, the chats are blowing up right now. But you guys are bringing up such good points that, I mean, we would be remiss if we didn't actually spend some time talking about it. So just rest assured, we're not going to go off the air until we hit all the chats. It's cool. So just, hold the thoughts. Or, if anything, just understand that by the time we get to some of the chats, it might be a point that we're making now, like 20 minutes from now. I don't know. But one of the interesting things is that Splinter of the Mind's Eye, in particular, almost became episode 5 because he wasn't sure he was going to be able to get Empire Strikes Back greenlit. And so the plan was Splinter of the Mind's Eye kind of existed as a script, and it was going to be a cheap sequel that he could release should, the whole thing fail. Now, of course, it became a cultural phenomenon like right away. So Empire Strikes Back just had piles of cash thrown at it, and it was all good. But this stuff existed, and that was kind of the novelization. What happened? That's why you had some things, because it was basically based on, when Lucas was gonna call like Star Wars, the Adventures of Luke, Star Killer at that time, and from the Journal of the Wills, or some like crazy long title that he had for this thing. Okay, so now Ronaldo presents us with this. Let's say Kathleen Kennedy hires both of you. Oh, I'd be a very happy man.
Oh man.
Of course, we'd be fired instantly, but she wants you to decide what the majority of the audience wants: High Republic or Old Republic.
Ooh.
And then he says, "What would be your answer?"
Yeah, that's probably your answer. I'm gonna go Old Republic.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. Yeah, it's tough because, like I said, the High Republic's doing really well right now. But I will say that the Old Republic has sort of been seared into the consciousness of most Star Wars fans forever. So I would go with that. I mean, I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised when they came out with this whole High Republic era, to be honest. Yeah, because it seemed like the natural thing to do would have been to just go right to the Old Republic. The only reason why I think that they didn't was because it was so far in the past. And that's why Avos TTV brought up a good point earlier. It was kind of like, well, what if they combine the two? Or, I mean, just kind of bringing up the Old Republic versus the High Republic thing, because I think that they were thinking that the Old Republic might be a little bit too far back and it might alienate some people. And so therefore, if they create another era that's a little bit closer to what's more familiar, they could use that to bridge back to the Old Republic. But again, I mean, if you're just presenting me with the question about which would people rather see, it's getting tougher and tougher, because with each release of the High Republic, you know, it's getting more and more popular. But the thing is, the Old Republic, thanks to games like Knights of the Old Republic and everything, I mean, everybody is a huge fan of that, and everybody wanted to see it. Look at the excitement when D.B. Weiss and the other Game of Thrones guy, but the two creators of Game of Thrones were basically, Benioff and Weiss, basically, right? So those two guys were supposed to do a Star Wars film at once upon a time before they got their Netflix deal. And everybody assumed, based on the fact that they created Game of Thrones, that, it's got to be an Old Republic movie. And it very well probably was. And look at how excited everybody was.
Yep.
So I'd say you'd have to go with Old Republic on that one. Let's see. Ronaldo also says, it's like comic book movies. Some fans think regular audiences are aware of what's happening in the comics, but that's not the reality. Yeah, news for you. A lot of comic book people aren't even aware all the time, because you have, and I remember, because keep in mind, I mean, it's been a minute since I've been into really deep into the comics, either Marvel or DC, but when I was a kid, which would have covered, like, say, the mid-'70s all the way up to the mid-'80s, there was a 10-year period where I was super deep into the comics, to the point where I almost was at the point where I could professionally start running comic booths, and I had an encyclopedic knowledge of all that stuff. But what I found even back then, when I was a kid, is that, I mean, take the Spider-Man series, for instance. You know, you had the Amazing Spider-Man, the Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man. You know, with Batman, you had Batman, Detective Comics starring Batman. You know, you had all these different...
The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight.
Stuff,
yeah, you had basically all these different series. So you basically had people that were really focused just on a particular series. Even with Superman, you know, you had the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, the Gold Age. I mean, you had all these different eras on top of that. And, you know, every so often they would start reinventing the character. So there was some people, like myself, at least at that time, who was acutely aware of all of it. And I was taking in all of it. It still kills me that I had a Wolverine issue 1.
I know.
Which is worth a lot of money now. And I had it. Because, see, the X-Men was brand new when I was a kid. I mean, it was just sort of like, they were the ones that were invented when I was a kid, so it was new. So, yeah, I gotta not think about that. But, you know, the problem is that it's the same thing here, you know, with Star Wars, in a sense, is that you'll get people that are just original trilogy people. Then you get people that were kind of more into the prequel era. Then you know, it's like you have different levels where there's some people that just focus on one thing, and then there's other people that kind of focus on everything. Fortunately for our audience, the people that tend to be drawn to our show are generally people who love the franchise. They're pretty much consumers of the whole thing. They like to talk about and discuss, or at least watch us do it, you know, some of the more, I guess, I almost want to say like philosophical and just, you know, kind of get into more of an intellectual discussion on the show, right? I mean, we're a unique show. And, you know, that's why it's great. I can't wait. It's great that we're getting more subscribers and, you know, things are happening, because we just love discussing this stuff with you guys. So there are people that are just into certain segments of it, but then there's other people that are into the more broad stuff. And he says John Watts is a great director. Yeah, that I'm super
Hmm.
hyped about that. I mean, I think that that's just going to be fantastic. Now, Avos TTV says, I would imagine they do the series format just how well received The Mandalorian has been. Speaking of which, I wonder if they will try and cash in on the hype. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really the thing, right? So I think what's happening is you're seeing somewhat of a snowball effect. The Mandalorian was definitely the flagship show. And there's going to be a couple of different things that are happening. The Mandalorian being the flagship show, but it's also the anchor show for that particular era. So we're talking about the direct post Return of the Jedi era. And the series that are reflecting that, of course, besides that, would be the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka. And if they ever do make Rangers of the New Republic, that would be there too. So you have that where I think what'll happen is as the seasons go on for The Mandalorian, they'll start seeding out different shows for that era. And you also might even see things that might take place. Like, let's say they're going to do something in Ahsoka. They might start that in The Mandalorian too and let it continue. I think you're going to see a lot of crossover type episodes as well between all the series in that particular era. Now we're about to get Obi-Wan. Now, it's a limited series, so I wouldn't necessarily call it the anchor of that era. But I think what's going to happen is when this High Republic series comes out, it's going to be the anchor of that era, and you're going to start seeing spin-off shows from that, where they might focus on one character or something. So, I mean, I think from that standpoint, they could do that. I mean, I think that it would be better to do that. And then if you wanted to make an actual film, obviously, if the series is successful, that goes without saying. I think if you wanted to do a film, you could do that. But yeah, absolutely. They're going to cash in on all these series because, quite frankly, and we've said this really, I think, is the future of the franchise. Because Star Wars is such a rich universe,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you kind of have to when you have a platform like Disney Plus. I mean, that's part of what it's designed for. Not only just to house your content that you've created for years, but that people can kind of have a central location to go to, but also it creates things for the future, where it can live and you kind of have a centralized location where everybody who wants to view that type of content has a place to go. I think, like you said, yeah, everything kind of has its stages. Everything has its eras, that kind of anchors things. Of course, we always knew the Mandalorian was going to be the flagship program because it's the first one and it was done really well. People loved it out the gate, and it's still getting critically acclaimed reviews. Book of Boba Fett was a little shaky, but then towards the end, people really started to get into it because once again, you're starting to merge the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian. It was kind of like a Mandalorian, like season 2.5 or something stupid like that. So I think what's happening too is that you'll also start to get things like that though. You get to play around with those crossover type shows, and everybody's doing them now. From not just I mean, you got Dick Wolf doing it with like all his Chicago series. You got
Well, and
Law
even
and Order
before
even
that,
doing
Dick
that
Wolf did it with
before
Law and Order. Law and Order was really the
Law and
first
Order.
one.
Yeah,
And
that's what I'm saying. Like,
actually,
Law and Order's doing it.
it was even before.
911 is
I don't
doing
remember.
it.
There was a show called Homicide: Life on the Street, which I adored that show. It may have been a Dick Wolf show, but the character of John Munch was actually created on that show. Like Richard Belzer is, I think he has the record for playing the same character on the most series. Because Munch started out on that. Then, of course, he was in Law and Order SVU. And then, of course, he appeared in like all the Law and Orders. And I think he even crossed over in some of the other Dick Wolf series too. So, yeah.
I mean, and and that's what I'm saying. You're starting to see it now, with a lot of the DC is starting to do like with Flash, with Supergirl and Batman, and
Yep.
so that's a lot of things that are kind of happening in these series on these different platforms. And so I think Disney Plus is no different, especially when you have something as vast as Star Wars. the series are really going to start to propel the franchise even more, and it's really a great holdover for when we that way they can really focus on the films, making sure they're nice, right, and tight. So when they're released, it just keeps everything going. And I think it's going to kind of switch roles, in my opinion, where everybody was waiting for the next Star Wars film, and I think we always still will. However, I think the films are going to kind of launch these series now that people are really going to get into, because people really get into binge watching series. I mean, that's like a thing now with people. When I'm at work and I work in a school, and everybody's, oh, what are you going to do on spring break? Binge watch, Bridgerton, or remember binge watch, Cobra
Yep.
Kai, or binge watch. Like, everybody's binge watching stuff, and it's kind of a thing for people to do. They have these binge watch parties. Eric and you and I do it with Cobra Kai all the time. So I mean,
Yeah, well, I
it's
mean,
kind
it's
of the
it's
thing.
because you now with these series, especially the way that they're set up, you could do like, why do a 2.5 hour movie when you can essentially do like an 8 hour movie now by having like
Exactly.
a 10 episode series or something. So I mean, there is that, but here's the thing though, where I mean, I agree, but I kind of disagree in the sense of, you said that the movies could launch these different series. I actually think it's going to be the other way around. I
Hmm.
think that either a series or a couple of different series will converge and then become a film. It's almost like how the Avengers are, right? Each Avengers
Hmm.
movie was sort of like the cap for that particular phase. So, you had phase two, so you had all the standalone films that made up phase two, and then they culminated in the Avengers film. That was kind of you know, the end of that phase. And then the next round of standalone films would begin the next phase. And I can honestly see Star Wars doing the same thing
Hmm.
because, especially with the post Return of the Jedi era, because you basically have a situation where you have The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and the Book of Boba Fett. And if you really focus, and yes, I realize that with Din crossing over in the Book of Boba Fett, it strengthens it even more. But even if he had never made that cameo, the story arcs of each of those three series interact and overlap in a lot of ways. Even if the characters didn't really appear in each other's series, which of course they do, but if they didn't, wouldn't matter. The stories overlap. So it would make sense that maybe at the end of, I don't know, season 2 of Ahsoka and season 5 of The Mandalorian and season 3 or something of the Book of Boba Fett, maybe you have a film that kind of ties up whatever bigger story arc they have. Or at least it could tie up an individual series. But I mean, we'll have to see. Let's see, we got Ronaldo. He says, I mean, some of the X-Men movies had a very good box office and great reviews, but the continuity was a total disaster.
Man, amen to that.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, man. I
Ugh.
mean, if you really want a lesson in what not to do, the X-Men is a great example
Mm.
of that because, oh man, yeah, it started out okay. I mean, when it was just the main cast, but then yeah, they just started.
I don't,
They
I don't
started
even know.
bringing
Like,
in. Well, first of all, you and I talked about this. They started bringing in too many X-Men for one.
well, I think they brought in too many X-Men, but I think they didn't do. Okay,
It's like you're
this really.
short
I
circuit.
know this is. I know it's
You
a
don't
Star
even know
Wars
where to
thing.
begin at this point. That's what's so
I,
funny. It's like that's how messed
it's
up it
true.
is.
It is, but I'm gonna try to make this quick. But this is
You
a Star
opened up
Wars
a
thing. But
really big thing on this one, man.
but
Oh,
with the
Ronaldo
X-Men
brought up the
thing,
X-Men. Ooh.
the whole thing is that, like, I think that franchise had the potential. Like, the stories they were trying to tell were really good at the very beginning. The problem is, I think that they um they missed up with a couple people, and, like, okay, Rogue being like 14 or something like that was stupid. Like, they should have made her a grown woman. It's kind of like, okay, the only kid they really had around was Jubilee. Like, okay, if you did that, fine. But, you know, um, and then trying to tell their stories, I think if you would have kind of taken a couple of them and it kind of almost did like they did with Marvel. Well, they are Marvel, but done with the whole Avengers thing is kind of giving them not their own movie, but just kind of show the formation of the X-Men, like the school and everything, how that kind of came to be, and then culminated with like, okay, we're a team now. We have this great big threat that's coming, like Magneto. We need to use our powers and for good, that type of thing. That's all. It's just like I think they needed to craft out more of the stories of these characters so that people would care about Cyclops. Why do we care about Jean Grey so much? Why do we care about Wolverine's always been the focal point of the X-Men anyway, even though he wasn't the leader. But I digress. This is Star Wars.
Well, I mean,
I'm
but
gonna...
but just a last point on that though. I mean, there's a couple things they could have done, like the whole X-Men Days of Future Past and all that. That timeline where they had the young X-Men basically.
Yeah, they should have.
They had the origin story.
That.
That's where they really should have started out.
Exactly.
They almost should have flip-flopped it. They should have done that first. But even more so, one of the things that I really enjoyed was when they had some of the standalone films, like the Wolverine series. And I think they had another one too. But if they had done that, right, and then had your Days of Future Past thing, and then maybe what we know with the Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman and all that stuff. Of course, that's hindsight. But yeah, I agree. That's what they should have done. And that's the thing that you do have to avoid. The X-Men thing is a perfect example. You don't want to have to be in a position where you have to constantly reboot everything. I mean, that's where DC was.
But see, that goes back to the whole thing where I think Ronaldo brought up about do fans care about canon? See, that's one of those things because everything is so out of order. You don't know what to believe. Like, okay, is this the beginning? Was that the beginning? It's, you're telling two origin stories and it's kind of like, it's confusing to people.
Well, I think what it is that, and it goes along with exactly what you're saying, is that people care about canon. It's not so much they care about canon, they care about conflicts. It's like if we're rolling along with a series of films, and then all of a sudden you come in with something that directly negates and conflicts with it, it's like, well, wait a minute though. We were doing this. What happened? I mean, Ghostbusters very nearly did that, right? Because they did that reboot with the all-female cast, and then they abandoned that.
Yeah.
And then essentially made the very amazing Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is essentially Ghostbusters 3. But it's kind of like, okay, you sort of confuse fans that way, though. You have to be very careful. I mean, yes, you want to be able to keep a franchise alive and make money. But one of the things that you really have to think about is what you have to really start thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. You don't want to destroy the franchise and sacrifice the entire franchise. Yeah, at the expense of...
Into the moment, right?
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so Ronaldo says, also, Batman did great, and nobody is asking if it's Ben Affleck or not. Most recent DC movies are doing well, and they're ignoring canon. Here's a really interesting thing to me about what DC is doing now. What they're doing is what some franchises have attempted but have failed at doing. And they're doing it completely by accident, which is what's even funnier to me. So the new Batman movie is very much a nice little companion to the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie. They have a very similar tonality. They actually exist, and this is the important point. They actually exist outside of the modern DCEU that we think of. The reason why nobody cares that it's not Ben Affleck, even though it was originally supposed to be, is because it doesn't really have to fit into that particular DCEU. It's almost like DC is actually doing what the comic books do. And that is they have these different series, like we pointed out. So while the Ben Affleck stuff, the Batman versus Superman, the Justice League, I mean, you could even put Batman Begins and all that stuff in there. That was really more like your Dark Knight. So you have the Dark Knight series, and then you have maybe like the traditional Batman series. And now this new one, the Batman, is Detective Comics starring Batman. Exactly. So you could actually do that to where you have a series of DC films that are more adult oriented, that are more grounded, that basically hit a different side, and you can release those in conjunction with what we would consider the standard DCEU thing, and it would be fine. That's another thing that they could do, and they're sort of doing that with Star Wars in a way. I mean, it's harder to do that with Star Wars because you don't have the different segmented things.
Serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all one thing. It's not like you have
Right.
well this age of Star Wars versus that age. I mean, you
Exactly.
kind of do with the Old Republic, High Republic thing. You could kind of
Yeah, but they're different characters, though.
Yeah, they're different characters, right?
So, I mean, you have different eras, but you don't have different variations or something, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Avos TV says, I bet we see Obi-Wan as the ribbon of the Clone Wars. I would also love to see if they touch on the Mandalorian in the High Republic. There isn't much info, so a lot of creative freedom. They could actually do that. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't be Din, but they could actually show where the Mandalorians are.
Mandalore.
Yeah, and in fact, I think I could be wrong, but I think I read somewhere that the High Republic is going to actually bring in the Mandalorians.
Yeah, because
the Mandalorians have been around for a while.
Yeah, and like I said, depending on the timeline, I mean, I don't know for sure, but that's where you could bring in Vizsla, and as being the first Mandalorian on the Jedi Council, because we don't know when that took place, and we obviously knew he wasn't there during the Phantom Menace time. So anytime before that, we just don't know.
Yeah, I think it was always assumed it was an Old Republic thing, but yeah, you could cheat that and make it a High Republic thing.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of things that you could do, with that whole thing. I mean, it just depends on everything. And he's right. I mean, I think the Obi-Wan series is going to it's going to tie up that whole Clone Wars era. And at the same time, I think it's going to be a nice precursor to the Rogue One New Hope era. Like, it's going to bridge those two. So that's a very good point as well. Ronaldo basically says, what's funny? In 12 years, both Professor X and Magneto gained like 40 years. Yeah, I mean, again, when you're dealing with the X-Men, it's every bit what not to do in a franchise. I mean, it really is.
I really would love to reboot that whole series. Well, I would probably leave some of the things like X-Men Origins and days, some of those things I'll probably leave, but yeah, I would love to do my own version of that.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, it's just like,
but every fan probably would.
Oh, absolutely. Just like another thing that got off to, it was basically another variation of the X-Men, was the Fantastic Four.
Oh my goodness.
First they made a couple of movies and they rebooted that again, and then that was terrible, and it never really caught on. And it's like the Green Lantern movie. Now, I actually like that movie, but I understand, because, and that was the problem that DC had too. I mean, DC was very much on that same path, almost as how X-Men was, where they kept making these movies and then it's like, no, let's not do that or whatever. I mean, you have to be very careful.
Yeah, and they keep threatening making another one too.
Sure. Absolutely. And I don't doubt it.
Green Lantern, this time with Jon Stewart, and who's going to play him? They've been throwing around Idris Elba's name, and who else? Tyrese and all these other people. And I'm like, oh boy.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's one of those things where if they are going to do another Green Lantern movie and they want to do a reboot, that would be the cleanest way to do it. Just get the Jon Stewart version.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because if they try to do another Hal Jordan one,
yeah.
But even though, I mean, it wasn't a box office success or whatever, I thought it was fine. I think they could have kept it going, and just have Ryan Reynolds be officially, well, I guess he kind of Well, no, that's still Marvel, Deadpool. So yeah, he could be part of the DCEU. But that's the biggest
Hmm.
problem that they've had, right? Is they had to keep trying to recast. It's just like them trying to recast Henry Cavill. It's like it's kind of like at some point you have to just go, okay, we need to start thinking about the down the line and not so much just about the now. And that's
Right.
the thing that it seems to me like Star Wars is on the right track with that. I think that Star
Yeah, I think
Wars
they
is starting to learn their lesson.
exactly because they tried that and they see very quickly how that became very divisive, and they're like, yeah, we can't do that again.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm I think I'm at the point now where I'm cautiously optimistic because they seem to have learned their lessons. They seem to be doing the right moves. I don't know. I mean, do you think that that's
Yeah,
working?
I mean, I think they're taking great steps. I mean, like, even for the High Republic, you have you have all the writers kind of meeting together to flesh out the story
Right.
all together. You've had um if you're gonna scrap a project, do it early, then later, then have 80% of the movie done, and then you decide to get rid of the directors or something stupid like that. If you see this, and I think they just need to kind of establish like, okay, who's working on what. And I think that's where there needs to have a direction. Like, okay, who's the oversight on the films? Okay, is that going to be Filoni and Favreau, or is it going to be one or the other? Like, okay, we know they got the series down as far as, man, are they just going to strictly be our Disney Plus people? And then, okay, who do we have for the films, and who's going to ensure that everything is, who has that type of care that Filoni and Favreau have on the film side? What are we doing with our literature as far as comics and gaming, all that? Like, let's just kind of have almost like department heads, almost in a way, just so everybody knows what the other people are doing, so we can kind of make sure that everything is going to make sense as it's being released. So I mean, I think it seems like they're kind of getting to that. Um
No, and
they're
that's
they're
a
they're
that's a really good
you
point
know,
actually. I mean, that's spot on because they already have the Filoni Favreau thing in place. Don't mess that up. That's working.
right.
Now
That's
you just
working.
need to duplicate that on the film side and you're all set.
Mhm.
And it does seem like they're moving in the right direction, that they're doing the whole course correction thing, which is good. Um and yeah, I guess we're just gonna it's gonna be interesting when we start doing the shows post May the 4th, post the celebration.
Yeah.
Because like you said, I have a strong feeling that a lot of these rumored things that are floating around, I mean, this one's basically confirmed, but a lot of the other things I think are going to be clarified. What films are we getting? Because they have ones on the schedule for like 2023, 25, 27, or something like that. And it's like, okay, we know Rogue Squadron's floating around. What are the other two? I mean, they actually have
Mhm.
dates for the other two films.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's still a Taika Waititi film, that's supposed to be coming out. You got, all this other stuff. Um
Yeah, but I mean,
Feige said he's not working on one, but then there's some other films that are kind of been like
there was
floating, like you
some.
said, floating around.
Yeah, well, there's this one other guy. Who was it? Somebody like revealed that they're working on some Star Wars project now. Um,
Yeah,
it was
I know
like
what
a
you're
recent
talking about.
story.
I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the director's name.
No, and it was somebody that everybody would be excited would be working on one too. Yeah, I remember that was just like one of the various sites and articles and stuff that we text each other on a regular basis. But all I can say is I think that the High Republic thing, I mean, we'll get your final thoughts, but I think that this High Republic thing, especially with the whole Stranger Things in space, is a good positive direction. I think as long as they just make sure that it works within the context of all these other stories they're telling, whether they're in the comics or the novels, as long as you don't start painting yourself into a corner or, doing something really weird with the story, I think that this actually is a very positive direction. and it's going to introduce us into an era of Star Wars that's needed. Plus, I forgot to even bring this up, but we know that the Acolyte takes place toward the end of the High Republic era. So it really makes sense that this series comes out, and, I mean, in my opinion, it should come out before the Acolyte, actually. I mean, I could see it either way. I could see the Acolyte coming out, and it sort of references the High Republic since it's at the end of that era, and then you go, oh, I wonder what that's all about, and then you get this series. But in a way, I think it would be good to get this series, and then the Acolyte is taking place at the end, and it would put it in more of a context.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree.
He agrees. So I mean, but the important thing, of course, as we always ask at the end of the show, well, actually, I usually chat it at the beginning of the show, but at the end of the show, we always ask, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on this High Republic series? Are you looking forward to it? If so, what do you hope to see in it? What do you think will make it successful? There's a lot of things that we can get going in the comment section. I want to thank everybody that chatted with us today, because it was a really good discussion. These are the kinds of discussions we love. But until then, I should say until the next time. We don't know what we're talking about Friday yet, do we? I always ask
Star
this.
Wars.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not going to be, the MCU or sometimes we even bring up Star Trek in this show, which is hilarious. But
oh, yeah.
Yes, it will be something Star Wars related. You could bet on that, because there's just so much going on in Star Wars right now that it's not even a question of what are we going to talk about. It's which crazy story that broke are we going to talk about. So you're definitely going to want to tune in this Friday at 8. As we do every Friday at 8, every Monday at 8, we're live, we're chatting with you guys. Again, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button, because it really does help this channel. And after all, we love talking Star Wars with you guys. So until this Friday, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.